Good evening and welcome to the LACMA Art and Technology Lab information session. I'm Ashley Harris, Marketing Manager from LACMA, and I'm thrilled to kick off the 4th annual and first digital grant workshop with Women's Center for Creative Work. In the next hour and a half, we will share an overview of the Art and Technology Lab program, hear from an artist who received the grant last year, review the request for grant proposals, and then take time for questions from the audience. We would like to thank the Women's Center for Creative Work for partnering with LACMA on this event over the past 4 years. The intention of this collaboration is to reach the Women's Center audience and expand awareness of this grant opportunity among creative communities. We encourage you to share this opportunity with other artists. Special thanks to M. Walworth for their continued support and working with us to move the event forward during the pandemic. We'd also like to thank Virginia San Fratello for taking the time to share her practice with us tonight. And big thanks to the LACMA AV team for facilitating the Zoom presentation. And with that, I'd like to share LACMA's working land acknowledgement. LACMA respectfully acknowledges that the lands on which our museum is built and the region that we serve is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Gabrieleño Tongva, Gabrieleño Quiche, Fernandeño Tataviam, and Ventureño Chumash peoples. Los Angeles County has been and is home to many indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands are here and elsewhere. As an art museum and a collecting institution, LACMA recognizes the role we and similar institutions play in the continual displacement of indigenous peoples from their lands, the theft of cultural objects and ancestors from their native caretakers, and the erasure and marginalization of indigenous artists in the stories museums tell. We are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing effects of this colonial legacy, building networks of support with and for indigenous art communities and tribes, and being better stewards of the lands we occupy. This acknowledgement marks LACMA's commitment to interrogating our own position in the structural conditions of settler colonialism and how we can work to dismantle them. As such, this statement is a work in progress and will continue to evolve through this process. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have brought us here together, and join us in a refusal to accept oppressive systems as they are. And now I'll hand it over to Joel Faree, Program Director for the Art and Tech Lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. That was a wonderful introduction. And we are excited to be with you tonight. Welcome to our presentation. I personally would like to thank Ashley, my co-host, for putting together this event with me. And I would also like to thank our grant recipient, Virginia, who will be speaking later, for presenting her work tonight. And I would also like to thank our AV team for supporting us once again, and the Women's Center for Creative Work for teaming up with us on this effort. So, Art and Tech, let's jump on in. In short, what the Art and Tech Lab does is provides financial and in-kind support to artist projects that engage technology or some kind of emerging technology. Now, you do not need to be a tech whiz and able to be in our program. We do look for an interest in technology and ways that you see technology as applying to you as an artist and to your work. Up until this point, we have supported over 30 artist projects, and we have awarded over $1.5 million worth of grants. We've worked with artists from all over the world, from Ghana, Ireland, Korea, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, Mexico, a really wide variety of groups that we work with. You do not need to be based here in the United States or in Los Angeles. You can be really anywhere in the world. All right. Our artists' projects that we've worked with thus far, they've engaged a gamut of different technologies. We've done stuff with artificial intelligence or machine learning, with 3D printing, with biotechnology, with laser scanning, satellite technology. So this wide spectrum of tools or technological tools that we work with is really brought about by our advisory board that we work with. And I'm going to talk a bit more about our advisory board later on. But at this point, I'd like to mention that we work closely with Hyundai, with YouTube Learning, with Snap, and with SpaceX, as well as independent advisors from Jet Propulsion Laboratories here in Pasadena, as well as independent advisors from academic institutions. All right, so I am going to continue on. And I kind of went over the overview here. This is an image of Rashad Newsom's non-binary digital humanoid robot being, which he has been developing with our support for the past few years. And so let's take a step back and look at where our roots lie. So before the Art and Technology Lab launched in 2014, LACMA had another art and technology program that took place from 1967 to 1971. And the impetus behind this was that there was a lot of interesting technology companies in Los Angeles, in Southern California at that time. There was a heavy aerospace presence, for example. And our curator, Maurice Tuckman, and Jane Livingston thought, that a lot could be gained from artists that they were working with in their day-to-day jobs, and really introducing them to technologists, to engineers that were working in the region, and to see if there could be collaborations that could come out of these conversations. So our initial art and technology program was really sort of a matchmaking kind of operation. We would take artists like, well, here we have James Turrell and Robert Irwin on the screen, and they would be, they were introduced to Dr. Bob Wartz, who was a perceptual psychologist at an aerospace company called Garrett Corporation. And they were really interested in perceptual psychology and the work that Dr. Wartz was doing there. Dr. Wartz was working with pilots and was trying to solve the problem of snow blindness that pilots would experience when they were flying through thick clouds. And Turrell and Irwin were interested in the sort of state of disorientation that you could get into when having this sort of snow blindness, and how that could create interesting artistic experiences. And what's interesting actually about this specific collaboration is that it didn't pan out. The artists walked off the project, and really you don't see a definitive artwork coming directly out of this this pairing. But what we do see is that in the long run, there is this impression that was made on the work of these artists. You do see in Turrell's work today that there is this deep interest in perceptual psychology and the way that we experience space. These ideas of disorientation really come into play. And so that's a really good example, actually, of the original program. And we learned a lot from looking at these kinds of pairings. I should point out that the artist projects from the original program had a high rate of failure. And we don't see this as a bad thing, really. You have to embrace failure, really, to innovate, to really further your practice as an artist. And we see that as a benefit, that this program could tolerate failure. And that's something that we carry forward into our current iteration. Another interesting takeaway from the original program was the documentation. The catalog for the original program is revered by a lot of artists and scholars. They kind of look back at it as this sort of grail for art and technology collaborations. And it really shared everything. It really told you about all these different collaborations that went on, all these pairings and what worked, what didn't. It's all there. And that's something that we wanted to incorporate when we opened the Art and Tech Lab program in 2014. What else did we learn? Well, we learned that it was better for artists to work with a variety of technology partners, that if you just paired up one artist with one technology partner, you may be narrowing the possibilities. So in our current iteration, we make sure that our grant recipients work with or have access to all of our technology partners. By the way, in this image that you see here, you have Terrell and Erwin on the right, and they are demonstrating a maquette of theirs with our curators, Maurice Tuckman and Jane Livingston there. So the new program, another thing that we wanted to kind of carry forward was this spirit of experimentation with new tools. In the original program, artists had access to tools that they never really could access before. Artists like Richard Serra had access to an entire steel yard and a crane operator who could move large, massive pieces of steel at his command. And to have this new sense of scale, these new possibilities, was a new paradigm of making artwork for many artists. And it required a great deal of risk-taking, but also experimentation, trial and error, those sorts of things. That's something that we like to see going on in our current iteration. The video that I'm sharing here is actually a series of experiments or case studies that our grant recipient, Yun Young Park, put together. She is interested in inflatable robotics or soft robotics, and has been doing these sort of tests that you see recorded here. And what, when we don't see a definitive project here, what we do see is that there's these ideas that are coming across in her work. This is just one of many examples that I could share with you, but unfortunately I only have so much time. But another thing that we wanted to do when we restarted the program was really sort of, I should take a step back. In the original program, the result was to be a finished artwork. The artists were at the end of their collaboration to produce some kind of artwork that would then be in an exhibition. And what we wanted to do in the new iteration was to put experimentation on top of, or champion experimentation, so that we weren't just looking for an exhibition. We weren't just looking for some new artwork to be created. Rather, we are looking for a new direction for the artists to take their work, to take their practice, a new series of ideas for an artist to explore or pursue that relate to technology. So we've talked about risk taking, and we've talked about experimentation, but what does this lead to? Well, it can lead to finished artworks and exhibitions, but it can also provide really exciting documentation like what we have here, and documentation that we can share with other artists, documentation that we can share with our public, that can influence the future of art making. So documentation is also another key thing that we look for in our daily operation. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about the nuts and bolts of the Art and Tech Lab and go into our annual cycle. And when I say annual, I'm kind of using the term loosely because not every project operates on a one-year cycle. I'll get into that in a second. But every fall, we meet with our technology advisors, and these are advisors from Hyundai, from YouTube Learning, from Snap, from SpaceX, as well as our independent advisors. And we talk about what's going on in the world with regard to technology, what interesting art exhibitions we've seen, what new ideas are coming across in the art and tech world. And based on these conversations, we issue our call for proposals. And we publish this, as many of you know, in late December, and then applicants have up till late February to apply. After that, all the applications are in, and we begin reviewing all the applications. This can be a lengthy process, especially as every year we get more and more applications. Last year we got over 600, which was over a 50% increase from the year before. So we review the applications, and then we announce the grant recipients in the springtime. Typically it's in May or June. Before that time, we will be getting in touch with the grant recipients to let them know that we'd like to work with them, that we would we may have questions about their projects, and we would need to work out a definitive agreement for their work. And then, as I said, in June, we announced the grant recipients, and we invite the recipients to LACMA to meet with our advisors from our technology sponsors, and to also meet our curators, our LACMA staff, our education team, our web and digital team, and to really kick off the projects. Every recipient has about, we put together a series of meetings where every recipient has about 20 minutes with each one of our technology advisors, and it's kind of like a speed dating round. And in these conversations, quite often, the sort of seed of a collaboration between artists and technologists can be born. After these meetings, we typically go out to dinner, and then the conversations follow over email afterwards. After that, we nurture the artist projects for a series of months, depending on how these projects develop and the artists' conversations with their collaborators, with their technology partners, how these go. Sometimes the sort of cycle of nurturing a project can go on for much longer, just based on the needs of a project. But typically, at least for this sort of sample case here, we'll say it's a year. After the project is kind of reached its definitive conclusion, we then work with the artists to figure out public engagement. How do we share what you've learned what you've done in your work with the Art and Tech Lab. How do we share that with our public? How do we share that with LACMA's audience? And I'll go in to public engagement more in a little bit. But we do have a number of ways that we do pursue this public engagement. After that, we follow up with documentation, and this can take the form of video, of photography, of code, whatever comes out of the project that we can keep for posterity's sake and for the use of other artists and scholars, researchers, that sort of thing. Sometimes it results in a publication of some sort. Sometimes it could be a performance or artist lecture. We'll go more into that in a second. But anyway, that's how our program runs in a nutshell. Now, the advisory board, I've talked a bit about this, but I should go more in depth. As I mentioned, our technology partners, they are leading innovators from our technology partners. So we work with engineers, we work with creative technologists, we work with scientists, researchers. We also are very lucky to work with people who are at the executive level of these organizations. And this board is really helpful to us in terms of realizing these projects and in terms of providing in-kind support. You know, our grant, we can provide up to $50,000 in fiscal support, but we can also provide various means of in-kind support. Now, in the past, we've been able to provide or send an artwork into outer space, which is actually still currently orbiting. We've been able to provide vehicles to our artists to use in their work or for their work. We've been able to provide hardware support, technical support, and also just the expertise that our advisory board can provide. These individuals, they have a great deal of experience of their own, but to speak more to that, they also have very elaborate networks. They're very plugged into their communities and can leverage these networks to get additional support for your work. So our advisory board is really critical to making these projects happen. Collaborations. So collaborations take many different forms. Some of them are very intensive, where the artist and the technologists are working and interfacing quite often. Sometimes it's more casual, and you'll see an artist, you know, maybe it's just over a series of emails that a conversation emerges. Sometimes the technologists that they're working with will be just lending expertise and just chiming in as needed. But it takes on many different forms. One question that may come up is, you're not required to, you know, engage with our technology advisors, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, because there's a great deal that you can access in terms of expertise, in terms of technical resources, physical resources, all different kinds of support that you can really tap into. This photo here actually is our grant recipient, Julia Christensen, and she has an ongoing collaboration with Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And she applied to our program to study obsolescence, technological obsolescence, and what she referred to as upgrade culture. And her project has been sort of this research on how different institutions, how we as individuals cope with upgrade culture, how we are constantly having to upgrade our personal electronics, how institutions are having to upgrade their infrastructure. And when she started talking to our advisors from JPL, it sort of rang a bell with them, and they're like, oh, we're working on a spacecraft concept for a spaceship that will need to actually upgrade itself autonomously. It will be making a 40 light year trip to the nearest habitable exoplanet outside of our solar system. And it will take us too long to communicate with it, to tell it what to do. So this is something that will have to make its own decisions, and it will have to really upgrade itself. And so they pulled Julia into these studies, and a really interesting collaboration kicked off. Public engagement. So this is a really important component of our operation. What we like to see is some way that the project, that your artist application will provide or engage our audience. And this can be at a local scale here in Los Angeles. It can be on a regional scale in the Southern California area. It can be on a global scale. And we've had projects that have taken place online only. We've had projects that have just taken place in outer space. And so really there's no boundaries for how the public engagement can happen, but we do want to find some way that we can share what you've done with our audience. Now, there's a variety of different forms, but here's one example. This is Carl Chang, who was a grant recipient from a few years back. He was really interested in building some machines that would engage and explore the viscosity of tar that you would find just outside of our museum in the La Brea tar pits. He had been experimenting with tar before, but has always wanted to come up with some sort of installation that would really demonstrate the artistic qualities of tar as a medium, as a material. And here you can really get a sense of the viscosity of it. It has this wonderful ASMR element to it. And what Carl developed was this maquette. And this was something that he saw as being installed outside near the tar pits, where the public could go and they could see firsthand this sort of phenomena where these sort of natural elements and these natural materials take on these artistic qualities. Now, because last year, we went into COVID mode and had to really pivot in terms of how we reached out to our public, how we engaged our public. And our grant recipient, Rashad Newsom, was really came up with an ingenious way to do this for his work. As I mentioned earlier, Rashad Newsom has been developing a non-binary humanoid robot. And related to this is a Vogue ball that he has been hosting every year. It's called the King of Arms Art Ball. And because of COVID, it couldn't happen in real life. So the event had to take place virtually. But there was this question, well, how do you take something that is very rooted in a physical experience and do it online? And what you see here is the result. And we were really pleased with this. This was something where we, as LACMA and the Art and Tech Lab, we didn't have to get closely involved in. We took a step back. Rashad knew his public. He knew how to engage them, and he was very generous in inviting our public to join and to celebrate the community that he has been working with over the years. And so this was really an exciting opportunity for us, not only to really take our engagement online, but also to really work with new communities. And so I'm going to wrap up my overview of the Art and Tech Lab program. Now, I will be going over the call for proposals in a little bit. But before we do, we are going to hear from our grant recipient, Virginia San Fratello, who has been so gracious to join us this evening. And I should point out that Virginia, along with her partner, Ron, recently won the 2020 Beasley Design of the Year Award for their teeter-totter wall project. A wonderful work that I think today could not be more relevant. And well, I'm going to read a short bio for Virginia. Virginia San Fratello is a co-founder of the Oakland-based studio Rael San Fratello, which is grounded in the disciplines of architecture and design as a basis for creative production. With her partner, Ronald Rael, she established the studio in 2002, following the attacks of the World Trade Center, in order to imagine alternative outcomes for creative practices in a post 9/11 world. A primary focus of their work folds together indigenous and traditional craft and material practice, contemporary design technologies, and storytelling as strategies to unravel the complexities of contemporary society. Virginia grew up in the forests and tobacco farms of the Deep South. Humor and play are important aspects of her work, which are often layered with serious topics that span the themes of immigration, startup companies, waste, homelessness, fashion, graphic design, and 3D printing. Her practice is closely tied to her commitment to public education and her role as professor and chair of the Department of Design at San Jose University, San Jose State University in Silicon Valley. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Virginia.
Thank you so much, Joel. I'm really delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to share the work that Ronald and I have been doing. I wanted to show two projects today. The first is called Mud Frontiers, and this is 2 years of research that we have been developing, and it was part of our proposal for the LACMA Art and Technology Grant. And the second project is called Casa Covida. It's a project that we started this summer, and it is in part funded by the Art and Technology Grant that we received. So we are here, and I am literally physically here in the San Luis Valley, which is the frontier or the historic frontier between the United States and Mexico. The San Luis Valley spans southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. And that is one of the reasons that we call this project Mud Frontiers. The other is because we are, of course, working at the frontier of technology, specifically additive manufacturing and robotics. And of course, because we're just quite literally working with mud. We're in a region where buildings have been made out of mud for thousands of years. This is a photograph of the Taos Pueblo, which is a little bit south of us. This building has been here for over 1,000 years. It is the longest continuously occupied building in the United States. And it represents a building technology that is sustainable. You know, it's literally built out of the ground beneath your feet. And for hundreds of thousands of years, mud was the most prevalent and ubiquitous building material in the world. And only recently was it supplanted by concrete. So we're thinking about mobility as part of this project, ubiquity, and democracy. So mobility, we're working with a very lightweight and mobile robotic setup. So on the left here, you can see the robot arm that we're using. It's very lightweight, it's very inexpensive, it can be picked up and moved by one person, and you can print objects that are much larger than the robot itself. Here you see the robot is holding a tube, which can be filled with clay or mud or essentially any paste that you could push through this tube and out the nozzle at the end. We've taken off that tube and we've connected the robot arm to a continuous flow hopper, which you can see in the photograph on the right. So we consistently load that hopper with mud, and the mud is pushed through a hose, which is connected to the robot arm and allows us to print with mud in the landscape here in the San Luis Valley. Ubiquity, of course, we're using one of the most ubiquitous materials in the world, literally just the soil on our land where we're working, and it's free. It can be found anywhere. We mix the soil with water so that it's a little bit more fluid and can be pumped easily through the hose. And we also add some chopped straw to increase tensile strength of the objects that we're making and also to help wick out the water while the objects that we've printed are drying. And democracy, we've developed a 3D printing software app called Potterware that runs in the cloud. And this app allows users who have never 3D printed anything before or never 3D modeled anything before to really quickly, literally within a few minutes, design something that can be 3D printed. So the software uses these sliders, which you can see, and makes vessels and waves on the surface of the vessel. And the waves are certainly decorative and beautiful, but they're also structural. And in more recent versions, we've experimented with non-planar surfaces and giving users the opportunity to make multiple simultaneous prints. And we have conceived of this research here in the Valley through the lens of 4 different projects. We have a little community of prototypes here that we're making. The first one we call the Beacon, and this is a study in lightness. So we have the robot arm extruding just one single coil of clay, and we use these crenellations that you see in the surface of this enclosure to add structural integrity, and those diminish as you go up because you don't need so much structure at the top. And we've also lit this single line of clay to kind of enhance and highlight the concave and convex surface of the structure itself. Another experiment was in structure. This is called the Lookout, and we were exploring ways to see if we could support the weight of the body. So we decided to 3D print a stair with this landing on top. And here you can see the robot arm as it has laid down this continuous coil in a Pizzelli-like pattern, which is very dense. And this is what the inside of that particular structure, the Lookout, looks like. So you can see all of this mud, which also has kind of wonderful insulative qualities, can support the body, and not just one person, actually many people. It's quite strong. This is a 3D printed kiln. It's probably the first 3D printed kiln in the world. And here we're printing 2 layers of clay, an inner layer and an outer layer, and we have an air gap in the middle. So this structure has some insulative qualities. The air comes in from the south and is contained here and creates kind of a vortex of hot air inside the kiln. We've dug a pit in the bottom, and we use this to pit fire the smaller 3D printed ceramics that we make. And then this object is called the hearth, and it brings together some of the earlier studies. There's a 3D printed inner layer and outer coil of mud, and those 2 coils are tied together by these small juniper sticks that we lay on the surface of the 3D printed mud right behind the robot. And these juniper sticks tie together that inner and outer wall of mud and give it increased structural integrity so that we can print more. We can print a little bit higher before we have to stop and wait for the mud to dry. But I think my favorite thing about this is the fact that it's made a furry building, and I think it's quite beautiful, and I like the aesthetics of this. On the interior, there's a hearth. And we've also made a bench where people can gather and sit around the warmth of the fire and enjoy one another's company in this protected enclosure. The Casa Covida is, as I mentioned before, in part funded by the Art and Technology Grant. We started this project this summer. The Casa Covida is a house for cohabitation during the time of COVID. And it extends the logic of some of the earlier experiments that we were doing. So in this case, we're still using the very lightweight and mobile robotic setup, but we've put it on a fourth rail. And this fourth rail is a horizontal axis that allows us to pick the robot up and slide it along that rail to continue printing another object. So instead of just printing one circle or one object, we can print 3 in the same amount of time that we could previously print 1. So we can only print about 14 to 18 inches at a time, depending on the weather, before the weight of the mud is too heavy. So we simply move the printer to the next circle, print, move it again, print. And then by the time we have finished that third circle, the first one is dry and we can go back and start again. So in the far distance, you can see that vertical element, which is the robot arm itself. And of course, the plywood is the horizontal rail. These are 3 rooms that we're creating. The one we're in now is a room for sleeping. This will be a hearth and a room for seating, which is the entrance. And then here, this third room is a room for bathing. The entire structure is made out of 2 layers, an inner layer and an outer layer. They are both composed of sine waves, which again increase the structural integrity of the wall. The frequency of the inner sine wave is double that of the exterior wave, and that's so that they will touch at points. Because this wall is going to come up and curve in and become a dome, the inner layer supports the outer layer as it curves, as it reaches the top of the building. And the robot is driven by a very simple Wi-Fi interface. So this is my partner, Ronald Rail, using his smartphone to control the robot. It's very, very simple and easy to use. Another innovation here is we've taken the robot and put it up on a box so that we can print taller than what the robot actually is itself. So the robot arm is about 7 feet tall. This building is 12 feet tall. So this allows us to increase the height of the structure as well. We're also using the local beetle kill pine to create lintels, which allows us to have openings in what would otherwise be a kind of continuous structure. So if you look over the door, you'll see this black line, which is the wood that we've charred, and we're able to just continuously print on top of that wood. And here at the top of each dome is an oculus. And this is the terminus of the structure. The idea is that when you're inside, you'll be able to look up and have these beautiful framed views of the sky. And here are the 3 connected rooms from the exterior at this time. This is the entrance. So we have recreated a hearth. We have the benches, we're developing custom textiles, and you can see the beautiful texture that's created by that really tight sine wave, which you saw being printed earlier. In addition to that, we're trying to, I think, make this really kind of livable and occupiable and kind of soften the technology in a way. We're also creating 3D printed cookware. So you can see a tagine that has a lamb stew in it, which we're cooking on the fire. We also have bean pots and casseroles and other serving dishes. Here's a close-up of one of the bean pots that we've 3D printed using a local micaceous clay from northern New Mexico. The form of this is inspired by the traditional bean pots that are made by ceramicists from the Taos and the Pecos Pueblos close by. We don't paint on the pots, but we use actually the 3D printer to create these textures and patterns on the surface that kind of replicate the intense geometry that you might see on a traditional bean pot or bowl. This is the room for bathing. So the bathtub itself is a water tank, like you might see on a ranch here. This is what the ranchers use for their cows. And it's surrounded by polished river rocks. And of course, as you're laying in the bathing area, you can look up through the oculus and see that beautiful framed view of the sky. And we're also 3D printing candle holders to go in here to create kind of a mood or an atmosphere through the kind of twinkle or sparkle of lights. And this is a beautiful white porcelain, which is also a clay body that's been formulated for a button factory in Pecos, New Mexico. This is called Pecos Porcelain. So we're taking this old traditional clay body that was once used frequently. The button factory is gone now, but the clay body still exists, and we're repurposing it as part of an indigenous material, so to speak. This is the room for sleeping. So we've stacked adobes up on the interior of this room to create an elevated platform, which serves as a bed, and covered it with local sheepskins. And we're working with an indigenous weaver to make custom textiles for this space. So he is using the local sheep wool to weave these pillows and blankets, and using the graphics from the Casa Covida itself. So if you look closely at the two red and pink pillows, you'll see that the motif on the surface is actually the floor plan of the building. So there's the entrance and the hearth, and to the right is the bathing area, and the left, the sleeping. And on the blue pillow and blanket, you can see the floor plan of the bathtub, and then the reflected ceiling plan of the sky above. So on the eve of Smithsonian Magazine's 40th anniversary, they made 40 predictions for the future. And the number one prediction was that sophisticated buildings of the future would be made out of mud. And it's our aim, with the support of the Art and Technology Grant, to make that prediction come true. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was a really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Virginia. All right, so I think, by seeing Virginia's work, this is a really, now that you've had a chance to look at one of our artist projects firsthand and hear about them, now we're going to talk a bit about, well, your application and the call for proposals document that we've published online. So I'm going to again share my screen. And we are going to take a look at the RFP and quickly run through it. We will be, feel free to, as I'm going through it, ask questions. And then after this, we're going to have a Q&A period, so I can address, what comes up during this reading of the RFP. If we don't get to your question in time and your question isn't answered, please feel free to email us. I should point this out, at LACMA, at lab@lacma.org. That's lab@lacma.org. You can also find us just on the web, lacma.org/lab. So let's jump on in with the RFP. I think, of course, at the top of the document is one of the most important things, and that is the deadline of February 25th at midnight Pacific Standard Time. That deadline is not negotiable. I know we get a lot of questions about that, if there is flexibility. And while we wish we could accommodate you, we just have to be fair to everyone. And in doing so, we have to make that deadline firm. So next, we have an overview of the program. It just talks a bit about our sponsors and what the program is about. And then we go into how to apply. As I mentioned earlier, you can apply for up to $50,000 for your project. And that is in addition to in-kind support. And we go on to list some various kinds of in-kind support here that you could have from our technology advisory board. And then we go on to outline the areas of interest. And this is an interesting part of the RFP, because we used to be very specific for areas of interest. We used to mention, we are looking for, facial recognition technology. We're interested in 3D scanning technology and this and that. But what we found out was that it skewed the proposals. And it really, we saw artists who really weren't that interested in facial recognition software applying with it, because they thought that they needed to incorporate that into their project. And so we made it more general for what we're looking for. And this is a good thing, because what we found is that the artists that apply to our program really define the trends in art and technology. We've seen, just by looking at the application pool, what artists are interested in working with at the time. And it is very definitive, actually. You can really start to see trends without having to hear from us about what we're looking for. We really want to hear from you about what you're looking for. So we go on in this to mention some important facts. You don't need to be in Los Angeles. I mentioned that earlier, but just to reiterate, that is a common question. You don't need to be a US citizen. You can be from anywhere in the world. Now, we do expect you to come to Los Angeles for meetings. And if the public engagement of your project does take place in Los Angeles, then we expect you to also be here for that as well. With that in mind, you need to include travel in your budget. Also, we go on to talk about the ideas that we're looking for. And what we say, preference will be given to projects that are publicly accessible and consistent with LACMA's mission. Produce models, prototypes, data. This is important because this allows us to share what you've learned and the work that you've done after that project has come and moved on. We also talk about, how we like to see projects that use our museum resources, what the museum has to do. Our program is rooted in an encyclopedic museum. And so there's a lot of, even, just inside the museum, of what expertise of objects in our collection, all the knowledge that that we have in our museum. And so there's ways to leverage that, as well as the technological aspects. Our commitment to diversity, we are very, very dedicated to this. We take this very seriously. And this is, something that we put first and foremost in our call for proposals. We want to make it very, very clear that we mean what we say when we have this text in here. All right, So now we're getting down to the nitty gritty, the evaluation criteria. Now this is what our reviewers are using when they are looking at your proposal. So you do not want to skip over this part. I would take this part very seriously. Is the project artist-led? Does it have artistic merit? Again, we are an art museum first and foremost, and so that is our first consideration. Does the project explore emerging technology? And people often ask, well, what do you mean by that? What if I'm working with a technology that isn't bleeding edge right now? That's totally fine. You know, when we say emerging technology, it's a broader use of the word. It's a broader application of that word. Really, what we're looking for is if you're going to be engaging with a technology, if you're going to be researching or investigating it in some way, you know, you don't have to be hands-on in terms of technology. It could research some aspect of technology. It could add to the continuing dialogue of art and technology. All right, models, methods, or data. This is, we already talked a bit about this. Opportunities to present demos, prototypes, collaborative opportunities. This is important. This is something that we look for. It really gives us a chance to look, you know, and start thinking about, well, how could this project have some interesting forms of public engagement? Okay. Moving on, the grant may require meetings. You know, you may hear from us before we announce the grant recipients, before we actually figure out who is winning awards. We do have to follow up sometimes. So, you know, you may be hearing from us before that actual time that the announcement comes out, or before we reach out to our grant recipients. We may need more information on your project. So you can think about it like this. If you're doing the application, you're like, oh, I can't fit everything in these word limits and I can't fit it in. You know, if we have more questions, don't worry, we will track you down and we will contact you. Again, we point out the deadline. Again, this is midnight Pacific Standard Time on February 25th. Again, we mentioned the amount, $50,000. It can be up to $50,000, so you don't have to ask for the full 50. It can be for less. You know, we have done projects that have been, I think, well under $10,000. We've also done projects that, of course, have asked for the full 50, and a lot of projects in between. Okay, now how to do put together your application. We do ask for a PDF, and that you include all of the specifics in this PDF, and that you submit it through our application portal. This is really important because this helps us track your application and to make sure that it is not lost. We do have the maximum file size of 7 megabytes. We do think that that is enough space. If you do have video, you can include it as a link to, you know, YouTube or to Vimeo. So you don't need to actually, you know, have submit video files or anything like that. And then we have the items that we ask for on that PDF, along with the word limits for each one. Again, these are important to address all of these. If you feel like, oh, I don't need to answer that one, I would say it behooves you to address each one of these items. Really, again, this helps our reviewers really conceptualize your project, understand it, So, don't feel like, oh, I don't need to, address all of these. Really, the more you can address these, the better. I think one question that comes up often is, well, do you have to have images in your proposal? No, you don't. We've actually accepted proposals that have not had any images. It's been all text and just explaining the ideas. So if you don't feel like you have great images or you don't have a visual manifestation of your idea, that's okay too. So, if you want to share images of your work that, aren't directly related to the project, that's fine. It may give us an idea of the work that you've been doing. And then the implementation plan. Now we do ask for a budget and an implementation plan. I'll go into more of this, I think, in the Q&A sections if people have questions. But basically, the implementation plan is a timetable, while the budget is something that just is a list of and breakdown of the costs. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and start our Q&A period. So I'm going to leave the RFP up online, and I think, yeah, here is Ashley joining us. So
hi, Joel. Yeah, we have a lot of great questions coming through.
Great.
So I'll kind of start it with a couple housekeeping questions. Are we going to post this video after?
We will be posting it. We'll be posting it on the Art and Tech Lab webpage, which is lacma.org/lab. It will take us a few days to get it online. So look for it online by the end of Monday. We'll have it there for your viewing pleasure.
Great. And then we also got a couple questions when you were talking about the history of the lab. Is there anywhere where you can access the old catalog as a PDF?
As a PDF, yes. It is, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to, we used to have it on our webpage. I will add it to the lab webpage as well. We have, if you look at our lab webpage, there'll be there's sort of a ticker tape feed at the top. I will add that as a link in that ticker tape feed.
A couple people were interested in that. And then we have some questions about like who can apply to this, who should apply to this? Is it open to new artists or just established artists? Yeah, that's one question.
Great question. Yes, it's open to anyone. So we've worked with emerging artists who are who maybe are just starting their careers, but we've also worked with very established artists who have had their own retrospectives before. We run the gamut, really. And so, we're open to working with everyone.
Right. And there was another question about collaborative applications. I think the question here is, can like an artist collaborative apply together, multiple people together?
Yes, we do work with collaboratives. We've worked with like duos, trios. I think we've worked with maybe as many as like 4 or 5 people in one grant. What we do ask for is, we sort of have one main point of contact who can serve as the point person for that project.
Great. And then someone else asked, can they partner with Los Angeles's visual effects industry, and named some specific companies? Is that something people can do if they have a partner in mind?
Yes, if you have a partner in mind, it's fine to list them on the application. We, are happy to, consider that. I think we've done something like that in the past, but we've also seen opportunities where our technology partners are able to also augment that collaboration. But yes.
Another question came in around tech partners, if they change from year to year, or if they're kind of a consistent group. And it seems like the organizations we work with is pretty consistent, but the specific technologists at those places kind of changes depending on the artist project, right?
That's correct. We do have a fairly stable advisory board, but the advisors may delegate people that they work with, people within their organization to work with an artist based on the needs of that specific artist project.
And then someone else asked, it seems like this grant's kind of geared towards visual arts. Are performance-based and like theater-based projects also something that would be considered?
Yes, we have. We are very open to performing arts. We haven't done that much, but we are very interested in that area and exploring that area, as there is a great deal of potential for technological collaborations with that.
And then someone also is curious about like what type of museum resources would be available. So maybe that's like the idea we talked about of LACMA being encyclopedic, kind of having a lot to offer artists. Maybe some examples of that would be
definitely helpful. We've had one artist who worked with data a lot and was interested in the artists in our collection. And so in looking at how gender played out within artists in our collection and artists that our museum has exhibited. And so we provide them with the data from our exhibition and collection and let that artist have at it. And there was a lot of parsing and I think there was also kind of sorting through it and looking at how you would define these terms and what have you. But that was one way. It was just data that the museum has. Another is our collection. We have a really fantastic collection, and there's ways to engage with that. Maybe a grant recipient, Caetano Ferrer, has 3D scanned architectural fragments that are in a collection and has used those scans to create new artwork. We've also had artists intervene in the museum's collection or in the museum's installations. So those are just a couple different ways. There's also our digital platforms that could provide interesting ways to work with us.
Great. And then something that's coming up, as it always does, is budget. So one question that a couple people have asked is, if my concept is experimental, like how do I work that into a budget?
Yeah.
And also, if I need to come to visit Los Angeles, should I include the cost of housing while I'm here? Kind of the nitty-gritty of budget questions.
Yes, I would go ahead if you do need to travel to Los Angeles for your research. I would budget that, include that in your budget. We do work with a number of location partners here in LA to provide studio space as well as accommodations for when artists are visiting here. It doesn't always pan out, but if we have enough time in advance, we can sometimes work behind the scenes and line up like a live work studio space if an artist is going to be visiting. But I would go ahead and include it in the budget to be on the safe side. We do have a sort of kickoff meeting at the beginning of our process. And for that meeting, we pay for travel and accommodation. So that first meeting is entirely covered by us. But then as you get into your project and if you have to come out to LA for, further research and meetings and what have you, that is where you should budget. So I think that's one part of the question. For the question regarding budget and how do I make a budget if I don't know where my project is going to go, that's a great question, and it comes up often. Budget or create your budget to the best of your ability. What costs do you anticipate having? This allows us to look at the way that you are planning your project, how you are anticipating costs. It is sort of a window for us to see into your thinking about the budget process, and that you are considering these costs and taking these things into account. We don't really hold you to the budget we don't get nitpicky, I should say. And what I mean by that is that when you apply, you submit your proposal with your budget, and then if you're accepted, to get grant disbursements, to get basically your grant is awarded in chunks. So to unlock each chunk of your grant, you submit a report with an updated budget. So let's say you realize that you are going to need less materials, but you're going to have to do more traveling. So you're going to need to maybe take $5,000 out of travel, or sorry, $5,000 out of materials and put it into travel. Those kinds of changes you can do as your project evolves. And we just ask for it that you give us notice in writing when you submit these reports for your disbursements.
There's a couple questions too about artist fee, and we definitely recommend that artist fee is included in budget, right?
Absolutely. That is absolutely 100%. We don't want you to feel, if I'm asking for an artist fee, they're just going to think, I'm not worthy of that. They just want to see that I'm going to do the work. But we want to see that you can pay yourself and support yourself. It costs a lot of money to be an artist. And we want you to have the time and the space to do your work. And if you're having to, work a job or two just to be able to, provide housing in a studio space, you're not going to be, that's less time that you could be working on your project. So be sure to include, an artist fee in that, in your application.
This is a question I haven't seen before. Someone's asking for when you're putting together your budget and you're thinking of your project and what the public engagements might be, do you also need to budget for those? I think the public engagements would be something that LACMA would support financially, right, Joel?
Generally, yes. If there are specific materials that your project requires, I would include that in your budget. But in terms of things like, costs that would be, let's say you're going to have a performance at the museum. We pay for security. We pay for whatever on-site costs that are needed. If, we have to provide speakers or, sound, we'll be able to cover that. But if there's things that specifically you need for that, let's say there's money for, if you're going to have dancers in your performance, we'd expect you to, budget for, if to pay the stipend to pay the dancers, or if there's wardrobe for that, those are the type of costs that you would need to cover.
Great. Someone else asked, kind of still in this budget space, how detailed they need to get with the implementation plan.
I would break it down into 5 or 6 installments. You can go as few as 3 or 4, but we've had people, go to as many as 7 or 8. But usually around between 5 and 6 is a good number, these are different, chunks of your grant that you're going to need to submit a report for each, or when I say chunk, it could be, I mean a grant disbursement. And to get that, you need to submit a report along with your invoice. And in that report, we ask for an updated budget if that's changed. And if your implementation plan has changed, we ask for an updated one as well. So, that's why if you are going to include a bunch of segments in your implementation plan, you're going to have to be reporting for each one.
Great. Okay, so now we have some questions. Can I apply with multiple projects? Like, can I apply solo and then also with a collective? Can I reapply next year? Questions like that.
Yes, so you can, you're very welcome to reapply. There's certainly no penalty for doing that. And you are welcome to submit multiple proposals. We've actually worked with artists who have submitted multiple proposals. There was one project that they submitted that we really liked, and then we actually ended up doing, while the other two just, didn't pan out. So, I mean, yes, you can definitely do multiple proposals, and you can apply as a collective or as an individual artist.
That's great. Okay, there's a lot of questions. I'm trying to find kind of the themes, but we have covered a lot. Oh, this is something kind of interesting. So someone's asking if the technology partners are part of the decision-making process for who gets the grant. And they're kind of wondering because maybe some of their ideas go against some of the products or initiatives from the technology partners.
No, we basically, what we do is we have an internal body that reviews proposals, including you, Ashley. And this internal group is from many different departments in the museum. And basically, if there's technological questions that come up that are beyond our levels of expertise, we do reach out to our technology advisors for feedback on, is this viable as a technological proposition? Those kinds of questions. We do have them weigh in on, like, does the technological thinking of this project make sense? But really, it is up to the museum's internal jury to that the decision process takes place, and then ultimately the decision is made by our director, Michael Govin.
And following up with that, how many artists or projects are selected each year?
We support generally between 4 and 6 projects every year. I think we've done 7 one year, but generally it's in that area.
Great. And then I think we haven't really talked about half-baked yet, and that's kind of coming up in the questions. Yeah. So people are kind of asking, what are like pitfalls that you see in applications, and what are ways especially emerging artists have stood out? And then we're also getting questions kind of like, what if I'm not sure yet about my idea? So I think talking about half-baked would be helpful.
So I think we took out the actual half-baked language, but I think we kind of refer to it more broadly. We do really like to see projects, proposals that are, quote, half-baked, that leave a lot of room for artistic and technological exploration and experimentation. That also leaves room for input from LACMA's staff, from our advisory board, who may have ideas for technological opportunities, for that their network who may have suggestions or means of support. Sometimes a project can get accepted, and then once the artist is in the program, they completely rewrite their proposal, and that's because there's a couple conversations that may have taken place that have spun the project in a completely new direction, and that's fine. Now, I don't know if that really helps in terms of like, okay, well, how do I craft this application that can, do all these things? Well, we were looking for interesting ideas, and we want to see into your thinking, because really, if you're just going to be submitting, a project that is an exhibition concept where you have the gallery mapped out, you're going to put this work here, there's not much experimentation that can really take place because you're just kind of already visualizing the output. Whereas if you're applying and you're saying, well, I'm actually really interested in this technology and I want to try and do this kind of thing with it, I'm not sure if it will happen, but from what I've looked at, it looks like it's possible. It references, it relates to this body of work that I've already done, and my interest in this kind of area. And so really it's a bit vague, and it does have to be a bit vague. It needs to be an interesting concept. As a concept, does it have artistic merit? We don't need to see a complete rendering if you're, going to apply for, you want to create an art making robot. We don't need to see the complete technological map of how you would make this robot, but we would like to see your thinking about it as an artist. What would the artistic implications be? How it could create an interesting dialogue between the world of art and technology. I think that may give a bit more definition. I think, were there other aspects of that question, Ashley, that I need to address?
Did we talk about kind of pitfalls?
Pitfalls, yeah. There's not like a certain word that you can list in your proposal or like, but we do like to see some open-endedness to it. If it is an exhibition proposal, we're going to have a much harder time looking at it because, again, it doesn't offer us much of our program and our advisors and our staff the opportunity to really work with you, because it looks like that the outcome is already completely fleshed out. So I think that would be the number one pitfall.
Yeah, and I'd just add something that you talked about while reviewing the RFP. Reviewers are looking at quite a few proposals, and so following kind of the prompts, having answers for each of those parts makes it much easier to review. So you can, because the proposals are often such kind of experimental concepts or the first time thinking about something, to have that organized layout really helped me.
Absolutely. That's really important.
Joel, someone asked if there's a good place to see example proposals.
Yeah, if you go to our website, if you go to lacma.org/lab, and then there's a tab you can click that says archive, you'll see a list of all of our artist projects that we have supported in the lab. And not all of them have it because some of them are still underway. And some of them just don't have the full kitchen sink of documentation with them. But if you look at the earlier projects that we've done that are dated to 2014 or 2015 in this archive, you can see some of them will have this option to download additional project documents. And these documents are the kitchen sink. You'll see the artist's initial proposal, the artist agreement that we executed with them, their reports for their grant disbursements. We've, of course, marked out personal information, addresses, and financial information as well, but it still gives you an idea of what we've supported in the past.
That's great. Well, we are getting close to our time here.
Indeed.
So is there anything else you feel like needs to be shared? If people still have questions, can they email?
Yeah, I would suggest emailing lab@lacma.org, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. But also, I think this just came up, to really use our website to give you an idea of what we've done in the past. So if you look at lacma.org/lab, you go to the archive tab, you'll find information about all the projects, and that I think can be very helpful. It'll give you more of a handle on what we've done already. It may help you understand what we're looking for. And then there's also on our webpage, there's blog posts that we've done that that really talk about some of our artist projects. So really, I very strongly recommend looking at the website to get more information about that. And that website, as well as our email address, are both listed at the top of our call for proposals.
That's great. Well, thank you for answering so many questions, Joel. And thanks to all the viewers out there for tuning in and for asking great questions. And we'd also like to once again thank our grant recipient, Virginia Fratello, for sharing her exciting project, and our AV team for supporting this event. And last but not least, we'd like to again recognize our partner, Women's Center for Creative Work, for teaming up with us on this event. And that's all, folks. Thank you, everyone. Good night. And we look forward to seeing